Okay, so hi everyone. So we are lucky because it's the last talk of the day. I think we are all a little bit tired, so I think it will not be a very complicated talk. I would just like to share three general ideas with regard to what's going on with the French agriculture. And there is one part that could help you in terms of methodology in order to help quantify and characterize the pest development in Vietnamese field. Of course, because I would like to keep it short, I don't have time to go into details about the methods, but you will be provided with a link. And if you have any question to this resource, please feel free to come again after the presentation, and I will be happy to discuss about it. Okay. So the outline of my presentation will be divided into three parts. The first part will be to present some key features of the French agriculture. The second part will be to present some ideas with regard to how to monitor pest population and injuries. And the last part will finally describe what's going on in France with regard to pesticide use. So at the beginning of the afternoon, we had some information with regard to what was going on in the Mekong Delta, and it would be the equivalent for France. We have different culture in different French regions, and you can see that for cheese. As compared to countries such as USA, you have just a couple of cheese in USA, and here we have an explosion of the number of type of cheese in our country. So just to make you have in mind that in France we have a very diverse agriculture. And why do we have such a diversity? I think maybe we can explain it by the diversity of the type of soils that we have. We have mountains, we have flat soils, deep soils, shallow soils. We have soils with a lot of clay or loamy soils, or also sandy soils, so it's very diverse. We have different altitude, and in terms of climate, we have oceanic climate, Mediterranean climate, and also continental climate. So if you combine all this, it's really, at the beginning, a big diversity in terms of soils and weather, and also in terms of cropping practices. So in order to have a general overview, here is the map of the type of agricultural production. So you can see that here in Normandy and Brittany, if you want to enjoy good butter and good cheese, you can go in this area. It's very famous for this. And the same in other area where we have some mountains, where it's easier to grow cattle and collect milk in such areas. Then you can see that in yellow and green light, we have mixed cropping and livestock. We are here in this area, it's called Beauce, to the south of Paris, and this is where we get a very high level of yielding for wheat and other cereals. Maybe you know a bit better about this red agricultural crop production. You know, it's a quality wine. Do you know what is this part? This part? Do you drink sometime French wine, or it doesn't exist here? Bordeaux, okay. Dr. Shaw, I think, is an expert in that type of question. Here also is a very famous area for wine production. Do you know which type of wine is located here? For party, it's very popular in France for Christmas or New Year's Eve with some bubbles. Yes, champagne and etc. And in the Mediterranean area, we have lower quality wines, but they are also not so bad. So what you can see here is that we have a wide diversity, and another way of seeing it is just with simple drawings. So you can see that close to the sea, of course, we collect many fish and seafood. Like in Vietnam, you also have a lot of seafood and fish. And also, we don't forget the French island, either in the Caribbean seas or in the Indian Ocean, where we also get agricultural production. And you can see here that if you go through the map, you will see fruits like apple orchards, pear orchards, apricot, plums, and so on. These are not fish from the sea, but from a river. Okay, and we also have mini forests that can produce a lot of wood. It's also a strong agricultural production in France. So you can see that if you visit France, wherever you go, you will have something interesting to test and enjoy some wine and some food. It's a small country, but with a very strong cultural interest for food. And I think we share that with Vietnam, from what I saw so far. Okay, just to illustrate what I'm showing you, actually it's difficult to select a collection of pictures. It would take maybe half an hour to have the diversity of the production. Just here, because we talked a lot about bananas, just to mention that we have this production, but here in the central area of France, we grow that type of cows. In the western part of France, we can have that type of apple production. This is sunflower. We also have, for medium altitude, some agricultural production, and of course vineyards and other arable crops. So, and you can see that we often experience snow at a given altitude and even at a lower altitude.
Just to say that banana is not growing in the country France, but in the overseas department when we need.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's important to mention that. Here, actually, I think the symbol is for sugarcane. Here we have, I think this is more Guyana in South America, and these are the islands more in the tropical or subtropical areas. But thank you for saying that. It is the same. We don't grow mango near Paris or whatever. It's a little bit too cold. Okay, so now just a few words about the European context. Depending on the country, economic weight of agriculture varies from 0.3% to about 5%. And here you have the map of European countries in terms of importance of primary sector in employment. So you can see that for the countries that appears in green, agriculture is really important to provide work to people, and most of the active population are related to agricultural activities. Other countries such as UK have a lower impact of agricultural activity in their economy. And for France, agriculture is a very important sector, but we also have other industry that shows that this is why it appears in yellow. Just for you to keep in mind that in Northern Europe, we usually have bigger farms. For instance, in France, we have about 15% of French farms with a utilized agricultural area higher than 100 hectares. And this figure is about 13% in Luxembourg, Denmark, and UK. If you go Southern Europe, like in Portugal, Spain, Italy, holdings are smaller. Okay. Another feature is that this map shows the less favored areas in the European Union. So if you go in the dark places, it means that these places were identified as not as performant as other areas with regard to agricultural productions. And so European farmers will get subsidies in order to help them to support their activities. And it's also something, I think, different from what's going on in Vietnam. I don't know if you have subsidies. I don't know, do you Vietnamese farmer get money in order to help the production? Not really. So I think it's also something very important to keep in mind when we compare northern agriculture in Europe, North America, Canada, and agriculture in southern countries, because these systems of support does not always exist, and after it raises questions with regard to the competition on open markets. Okay, in Europe we have 2/5 of the farms which are growing arable crops or permanent crops. And one of the main production are cereals with 57 millions of hectares. France is considered to be first for plant production value, and the first producer of wine. It depends on the year. Sometimes Italy can be, in terms of quantity, before France. And it's third behind Italy and Spain for land area given over to fresh vegetables. And so you can see that the most important European countries in terms of plant production is France, Italy, Spain, and Germany, and the Netherlands. So some other examples. So if you focus on the production of pig and poultry, you can see that most of the production is located in four countries: Eastern and Central Europe countries, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, and then we go back to Northern Europe with Netherlands, Belgium, and so on. So 4 countries concentrate 60% of all European Union animal production. We have more than 60% of European milk that is produced in Germany, France, Italy, the Netherlands, or the United Kingdom. So you can see that there are some specialization of some European countries with regard to some crop production. Milk, cattle, and pigs represent 3/4 of the total value of animal production in the EU. France and Germany are the biggest producers, followed by Italy and Spain. This is a general figure. One French agricultural holding out of every 3 specializes in rearing herbivores, compared with 1 in 5 in Europe as a whole. So we have a higher proportion of rearing herbivores. And on the other hand, it's what I said, 80% of pig and poultry farms are just in 3 member states: Romania, Poland, and Hungary. And France and Germany supply 1/3 of the European Union's milk. So you can see that's it's not a flat distribution of production within Europe. Now, I wanted to show you the changes over time in terms of number of farms and in terms of size of the farm. So the green bars here represent the number of French farms. And you can see that in 1988, we had more than 1 million farms. And if we look up 20 years later, this number was divided by 2, with around 500,000 farms in France. In the meantime, of course, the size of the farms increased from something around 27 hectares per farm to now something around 55 hectares for one farm. So it's what we mentioned. There is an increase in the size of the farms, and also an increase in terms of mechanization in order to be able to take care of all this land. France is the first wheat producer of wheat. In terms of cereal, we have 4 major crops: wheat, corn, oat, and triticale. We have more than 9 million hectares of cereals, and it takes up to 15% of utilized agricultural area. This is why even for this crop, the quantity of pesticide is not necessarily high per surface unit. However, it covers a high proportion of the utilized agricultural area. And we produce per year something like 68 million tons of cereals. And just to give you some typical yield, for wheat we have 6.6 tons per hectare, with maximum higher than 7.5 tons per hectare. And in some regions, some farmer can go beyond 10 tons per hectare. Maize yield of 9 tons per hectare, and sunflower is much lower, it's 2 tons per hectare. But it's a crop it's a spring crop that's interesting because it doesn't require a lot of water, and it's quite resistant to many pests. And so we don't use a lot of pesticide on that type of crop. Here, just to mention some changes over time of the surfaces in terms of hectare for major arable crop production in France: wheat, grain maize, sunflower, barley, and oilseed rape, depending, of course, on the competitiveness of each of the crops and how much farmers can make by growing that type of crops. In France, we have other more general specificities than the type of production. Organic farming represents about 5% of the French utilized agricultural area, which represents more than 1 million hectares, with a very strong increase currently. Even in the Réunion Island, there is a strong interest for organic farming. The UE regulation forbid GMOs, so we don't have GMOs, and also for animals, we don't use hormones by European regulations. And there is a drastic decrease in permanent grasslands. Between 2006 and 2010, there was a decrease of 6%, now it represents about 20% of the French utilized agricultural area. And so at present, there are many controversies with regard to agricultural performances, because on one side, life is very difficult for many farmers. We often talk about suicides. It's something like, I think, 2 suicides per day or something. It's that type of figure of farmers who are not able to give back the money that they borrowed to the bank. And also there is, on the other side, strong concerns with regard to the environmental impact of farming, with regard to water pollution, soil erosion, and the impact in terms of biodiversity and health issues. So this is just some covers of a journal that says Bonnes vacances, which means enjoy your holiday. And you can see the picture of a little boy trying to have fun on a beach, which is covered by green algae caused by nitrogen that was leached into the environment by too intensive agricultural activities. This is also a strong concern for some regions with erosion problems. And in addition to that, there is also some concerns with regard to the animal welfare. More and more in France, people tend to get vegan and try to reduce the consumption of meat. First, because there are some ethic issues. Well, I'm an animal, and why should I eat another animal? It's not fair for him, so it's some type of philosophic thing. Also, from the energetic point of view, 1 calorie of meat costs much more than 1 calorie of plant that is being ingested. And also some studies mention that eating meat can give cancer, and there are some concerns with regard to the consumption of meat and human health. And the last point that I wanted to share is that there is a strong willingness for locally produced food. And instead of going to the supermarket, people more and more try to get in connection with the farmers in order to buy directly his production, either for meat or for vegetable, fruit. And it's really a strong trend, not only in the countryside, but also in smaller cities where some networks are being intensively developed. Okay, so it was just the overview for France. Now I will move to the second part of the talk, how to monitor pest population and injuries. So on this slide, I just share with you the first warning bulletin that we found in Burgundy. And it's very interesting because I think I told it before, after World War II, my institute in Rouen was created in order to help improve yield in France, in order to be able to feed the population. And one of the main questions was how to protect crops against weeds, animal pests, and diseases. So the French government set up a network of advisors which would go into the fields and say, oh, I'm observing aphids or that type of disease. Be careful, you should do something. And just after World War II, humankind made great progress on how to kill other human beings, especially with chemicals. And this progress that were made for war was adapted in order to make the war against the animal pests and diseases and weeds. So for this first bulletin, it's in French and you cannot read it clearly, but it mentioned this pest. There are several species on Autonomus, which attack several fruit crops. And here, the bulletin is full of hope because he says to farmer, okay, be careful with this bad guy, but we have the solution. We have DTT, so be full of confidence. We are they were happy to provide the advice that if you apply this insecticide strongly, then you will get rid of this bad guy. So this information, if you look in the past, contain some information interesting. And it's funny because during two talks on Tuesday with Philippe, we had similar point of view with regard to the parallel that we can draw between modeling and painting. And you finished by a sentence on the relationship between time and between the past and the future. And I wanted also to share a quote by this person. So I don't dare to ask you who is she because it would be difficult to answer. She's a lady from Sweden, and she's called Christina, Queen of Sweden. And I chose her because she said that studying history is the ultimate passport for the future. Okay? And why do I share this quote with you is that if you take into account all the warning bulletins that were broadcasted to all the farmers for arable crops, fruit production, and so on, if you collect them, then you get a lot of information that can be used, for instance, in order to design new models. And if you remember, on the second day, I presented this case study where I used this warning bulletin like this that were originally written for farmers, but they contain qualitative information. And you can use that type of information in order to be able to construct a model that can help you to manage what will be going on in the future. Okay, so that's why this idea of using the past in order to help make good decisions for the future was something I think quite powerful. So I just mentioned this website. I don't think that it will be useful for you, but maybe just keep in mind the idea if one day in Vietnam you get some warning system to collect this information, because after, if you have information with regard to soil, cropping practices, weather, and pest development, then maybe you can be able to provide new insight and information for farmers. So in your research activities, I'm sure that you often have that type of question on how to quantify either injuries or pest population. What is this weed, or what is this insect, what is this disease? You may have also the question, which scale should I use to characterize this? And how many plants should I observe, or how many insects should I count? And when should I observe? And if I have students, how can I train them in order to recognize and to perform the observations, etc., etc. All these are questions related to what we can call phytopathometry, not only for diseases but for any pest on a broader scope. And I will not go into detail, but you can have a look on this website. It's called Quantipest, and it gathers a set of documents that will help you to do 4 activities. The first type of activity is to identify a pest or an injury. So in that instance, you have some references to help you do that. To be honest, I'm not sure that it would be very interesting for you, because it's mostly for temperate pests. However, I think that colleagues from CIRAD provided information, so it can be worthwhile to see if there are something on mango or banana, for instance. Then the second part is for the quantification. If you need to use a scale, people share their protocol, and you can have a look, and you can get some insight on the number of scales that exist for one given pest. Then you have some mathematical tools in order to help design sampling strategies. It's to answer to the type of question, how many samples should I take? Well, if you are able to provide an information on which precision you want, then some mathematical tools will help you decide the size of the sample, or the spatial strategy in order to collect the information with regard to the spatial distribution of the pest. And the last part are training programs in order to help people gain expertise with regard either to recognition of some diseases or symptoms, or to be able to follow a given scale. And also, if you're interested by that type of techniques, please don't hesitate to contact me. We can set up a training program for you. If you have a specific question, you can say, I have a collection of pictures. I know that they correspond to a given scale, and you can use these pictures in order to train other colleagues or students with regard to that. Okay, so I didn't have time, so no examples for this, but feel free to pay a visit to the website. Okay, the last part is dealing with the pesticide use in France. First figure, we have something like between 60 and 70 million of tons of 60,000, okay, between 60 and 70,000 tons of pesticide sold in France. Here you have the changes over time of the area of agricultural production in millions of hectares. So you can see that here we roughly have a little bit more than 2 kilograms of pesticide. It's something like 2.4 pesticide per hectare in France. From the figure that we saw before, it's something that was closer to 5 kilograms, if we were correct with Philippe. So it means that in Vietnam you have a higher quantity of pesticide applied per surface unit. However, we cannot directly compare because it depends on the molecule, and some might require a higher amount of pesticide than others, depending on the age of the pesticide on the pesticide use. Just to give you some references, here are what we call treatment frequency indexes. It means it's the number of time that a pesticide will be applied at the registered dose completely in a given field. So you can see that most arable crops are between 6 and 2. Okay. In southwest, close to Toulouse, we are not so bad because we have crops, spring crops like sunflower, and we have maize. So these two crops only have treatment frequency index of 2. So in our cropping system, it reduces a lot the treatment frequency index. Otherwise, oilseed rape reach usually treatment frequency index of 6. Usually it's 2 herbicides, 2 insecticides, and 2 fungicides. And our champions is potato, because we mentioned it already. It's for potato late blight, which causes to reach something like a 16 treatment, because it's an exploding disease, and if farmers don't treat, then they really have a big problem. And you can see that in 5 years, between 2006 and 2011, it didn't change at all. The figure is really similar. So as a consequence, you can get that type of results. If we analyze the pesticide concentration in surface water, you can see that in the French map here, we have for orange, red, and brown figures, concentrations of pesticide which are higher than the limit authorized for consumption. So it means that if we take water to provide to population, we cannot give it like this, and we need to remove the pesticide from the water before distributing it. So it costs also a lot of money, and it's often something that is not taken into account when we perform, the threshold theory. We don't take into account that type of costs, which are hidden, but the society has to support it, in addition to the support to all the impact on biodiversity and risk health. Also, just one comment. This is a threshold that is in the regulation, in the law. However, it's difficult to imagine that we can share only one threshold for all type of pesticide, and colleagues in ecotoxicology know that it's very difficult to imagine only one threshold. The impact of one pesticide is very different depending on its activity process. So more and more in France, people are aware of the danger of pesticide, not only for biodiversity but also for farmers and consumers. And this is a picture of it's the supermarket where not often, but from time to time, I go there for shopping. And I don't know if you can understand, but okay, pesticide in French is the same word, and here it's for all, pesticide for all. So it was.
For mango?
Sorry?
Is it for mango?
Yeah, for mango. Especially on mango. Now you can see that there are 4 people who are putting this very big sign, and they are from Greenpeace, and they want to make an action against Leclerc, which is a supermarket brand in France, in order to explain to people that that type of vegetable and fruits and what they can find in that type of shop is not good for agricultural production and maybe for consumers themselves. So this increase of awareness made policymakers change regulations. It did not start last year, because as early as at the beginning of the 90s, the regulation were made more difficult and to get approval for a new molecule, and also the old molecule had to be tested again in order to keep the right to be available on the market. So you can see that by the mid-90s, we had more than 800 specialties that were authorized in France. And because of this European directive, we decreased the number of molecules authorized, but we still have something like more than 300 molecules that are authorized in our market. Another important policy is at the European level, the directive that is called the SUD directive for sustainable use of pesticide directive. So the name itself is a little bit strange, because you could, if you are a bit if you think in another way, it means that the directive could have the objective to make the use of pesticide always in the time, to keep it always active in the time. I think that when Europe proposed this directive, the idea was to make the application of pesticide less impacting on biodiversity and human health, but it's the way of phrasing it is also a bit strange, I think. This is not readable, but it's just to mention that at the last part of this directive, there is a description of what is IPM. And I went through the entire document, and I wanted to have an indicator of the type of content that was within this directive. So I looked for the word chemical, and I found 9 occurrences for the word chemical. When I looked for ecological or agroecological, I found 2 occurrences, and for agroecological, I found 0 occurrence. So it means that from the European legislation, the regulation by itself does not propose a strong reduction of pesticide. It's something very smooth, and like Philippe mentioned during his talk on Monday, all the European countries had to change by 2014 into IPM systems, and during the night all the systems changed by magic. It's because the term IPM have many meanings, and it's easy to, as long as you start to do something a little bit like using a warning system or using a cultivar with a bit of resistance, then you fall within the definition of IPM. So in France, we applied this European directive with a national action plan. Actually, all the state members have to apply such a plan in order to reduce pesticide use. So I wanted to show you the 2 logos. It was the first logo because the National Action Plan for France was called Ecophyto 2018. It was launched in 2008, and the aim was to reduce by 50%, if possible, pesticide in 10 years. Okay. We put more than 40 million euro per year, which is more than 1 teradongs per year. It's difficult with the dong unit. It's a very high number. It's 10 to the power 12. And because actually the practices didn't change, and actually you will see the figure, the French government realized that it was not possible to reach this objective, so now it was baptized again Ecophyto, and the aim was postponed to 2025 for this reduction of 50%. But you can see that there is an increase in terms of money that is being put into this objective of pesticide reduction in France. Okay, so with all these efforts, I wanted to show you this graph as a function of the year. So in 2008, it's the beginning of our national plan for pesticide reduction. Here, it's the number of unit dose for the entire France. And first, I would like to ask you what type of pesticide is associated to each color, according to you? Blue, brown, and yellow. So according to you, which type of pesticide is the most commonly used in French system? Sorry? Copper? No. Yes. Yeah, it's herbicides. The second one is fungicides, and the third one is insecticides. I just wanted to show you this with regard to the efforts that we put every year to try to change the practices. And you can see that despite that, we have a slight increase. Here there is a small decrease, but it's difficult to comment year after year. But you can see that the plan actually didn't really work because we could not reduce the dependency of French systems with regard to pesticides. I don't want to be too pessimistic, and I wanted to share some element for hoping. So I cannot describe this Ecophyto national plan because there are many actions. It's a little bit complicated. But together with Jean-Philippe, we are involved in a committee that follows something very important for the national action plan, which is a farm network where farmers are involved in order to reduce their pesticide use. So up to now, there were 2,000 farms located in this on this map, and you have all type of production. You have vineyards, you have arable crop, tropical crops, horticulture, vegetable, and vineyards. And for all these systems, farmers are followed by advisors in order to help them reduce pesticide use. And you can see that between 2010 and 2015, in these farms, we nearly reduced by 20% the treatment frequency index, with some discrepancies with regard to the type of agricultural production. So this is a good sign toward the possibility of reducing pesticide use, even though we really need to have a higher limitation of pesticide if we want to better protect the environment. A question for you, what is this? I think for some of you it's very easy according to the preceding presentation. Do you know what this is? There is a good student. Can I have a proposal by a Vietnamese participant? You recognize it? You're using it, yes? Yes, but this one is one molecule, very famous, and you are using it against weeds. It's one of the most famous molecule. It's glyphosate. Yeah, glyphosate. Yeah. And so why did I show this picture? Okay, I will make another test. Do you know this couple? You know them? So it's not Charles de Gaulle. It's our present French president and his wife, Emmanuel Macron, and Brigitte, his wife. And why do I show this picture? It's because a few months ago, Emmanuel Macron sent, on Twitter this information. I asked to the government to take decision with regard to stop the authorization for glyphosate in France. And maybe people can take the time so that we have solutions to replace glyphosate, but it should happen before 3 years. And this was a revolution in France because farmers are really using, when I say farmers, most of the farmers are using glyphosate, and some of them are really dependent on glyphosate use. And so there was a strong debate, controversy in France, whether it's good to forbid glyphosate, because most of the people who are sensitive to biodiversity and human health are really happy with this decision. But farmers are really unhappy with that, and there was strong discussions among the government and farmers. And my institute and myself, we had to produce a report, an expert report, within 4 weeks in order to provide solution on how to replace glyphosate and what system we can set up in France in order to help farmers to reduce glyphosate use. And like what was mentioned in the talk by Dr. Sen, the areas where we have strong slopes or where all the machines cannot come are pose problem. And also the situation in conservation agriculture often rely on glyphosate, and it's the two type of production situations where it's difficult to replace glyphosate. So now the idea is maybe to forbid glyphosate, but to keep it for maybe 10% of the French territory with regard to these exceptions. Okay, the conclusion. I try to take benefit from our stay in Vietnam, and from what I saw, we really have different soils. We have totally different weather. You will be very cold in France at the moment. We have different crops. The pests that we have are different. The practices that we are also different. The economic drivers are totally different in Vietnam and in France, and also the social organization are totally different. It's the first thing that we can say. However, I think that we are on the same boat because we have the same problem. We want to produce agricultural goods, but at the same time, we have also to reduce the impact that we have on the environment. So the situations are totally different, but I think that we are on the same boat, and I have a proof for that. We're really on the same boat, and everybody's got his jacket, his lab jacket, so this is good. The other idea that I wanted to share is that France and Southeast Asia have a common history, and that was quite sad with colonization and decolonization, but we share common concerns with regard our future generation. And I think I'm happier to be here to share with you these ideas and trying to interact, and it's better to have that type of interactions than the interaction that occurred during the last centuries. And so I think that we get mutual benefits by sharing all sorts of concepts, knowledge, methods, tools, and experiences. We did it in the classroom, by small groups, or by lectures. We did it in the field, working hard or working less harder, depending on the on the position and the timing. And the experiences were also different, but you can see that some of us learn how to walk on a branch, how to drink more and more, on how to drink motorbicycles. Okay, so come on for your attention. Thank you very much.